Welcome to the creative brain of Dean Hawk. Get ready to be challenged, inspired, and equipped to become a better ministry leader.
Hey, welcome back to the Dean Hawk Leadership Podcast. We're in part 2 of a prescription for worship. Brad Fontaine, my worship pastor, is joining us once again. Welcome back, Brad.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, just to jump right in, there's so much material to cover and such good stuff last month. If you missed it, go back and listen to part 1 of a prescription for worship. A lot of great material covered there. And also, I want to say up front, if you are a pastor or worship pastor and you have any questions, Brad would be glad to answer them. And his email is brad@rockfamilychurch.com. You have a question for me about this area or other subjects you'd like to see covered, it's dean@rockfamilychurch.com. All right, I'm gonna just jump in on a hot one, a hot question, because I'm asking the question, but I have my own opinions on it. How important is it for the pastor to be in the service when the worship set is going down?
Man, this is a big one. It makes a huge difference when you and Pastor Kim are there. I can tell you that there is a marked difference in the response of the people when you guys are there kind of leading the charge of creating the tone of the worship experience. Why
is that?
I think, I don't really know, honestly. Like, you guys are engaged.
Well, and here's what I would say. He's the best dancer, jumper. I try and be his number 2 because he's leading from the stage. And here's what Kim and I try and do. Can we lead from the pew? Can we lead from the front row? Can we set an example? And so here's what I think it does do. I set you up, but I have my own opinions.
Okay.
If a pastor, I'm going to just call you out, pastor. If you are ditching the worship set, I don't care if you're praying for somebody in the lobby and you're doing ministry. If you're not there, you just sent a message to the whole crowd. What's going on isn't really that important because you're not there. And here's the way I put it. If I'm going to listen to him 3 times, he has to listen to me 3 times on a Sunday morning.
and honestly, like, even from an energy standpoint, I encourage my team every week that, for us to engage regardless of how the people are responding. But when we have you and Pastor Kim up front and you guys are engaging, obviously there's an energy that we feed off of.
Right.
And it just adds to the atmosphere and makes it easier for us.
And I think the way a pastor can understand it is when the first couple rows are amening when you're teaching. That's good.
Makes a huge difference.
You create energy.
Yep.
And I always tell this. I tell our leadership to sit in the first 3 rows. Our elders, our board, our leadership, anyone who's on staff, part-time staff. When you're in service, sit in the first 3 rows because we want to set the model for the other rows behind us. This is how we worship.
Absolutely. I actually heard it said, I was at a conference, thousands of people at this conference, and I believe it was Louis Giglio was on the stage, and he looks at Brian Houston from Hillsong, and he asked him, he says, "Hey, who is your worship leader?" And I forget who was at the time, but he answered that person's name, and Louis Giglio says, "No, you are the worship leader of your church.
That's
you
good.
set the tone of the worship culture that's going to be created." And so I never forgot that.
That's valid.
So
pastors, get out of the back room. And I like to be very blunt and practical. 3rd service, after standing since 8 o'clock when I got here, greeting people in between services, 3rd service, and I do tell Brad, every now and then I will go into a deep prayer mode. And I sit down and I get in deep prayer because I know I got to preach and my legs are just feeling it.
Yeah.
I know I should be in more shape.
But he's in there.
But I'm in there.
But he's there.
So pastors, get out of the back room, be in there, support your team. All right, real practical. How do you write a list? How do you decide what songs to do and what songs go together? Navigate with some of those.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about it last month, where we talked about just having a pulse of what God is speaking to your church during that season. The first place I will look is the series that we're in.
Sure.
There's some series, if we're in a financial series, there are a lot of songs that are going to speak to that directly.
But like Love Revolution was a great one to...
And honestly, there have been so many times when I don't even mean to, but just in prayer, I'll feel a song in my heart, and it ends up being right in line
Like
with your message. Yeah.
hammer on top of the
So just trying to keep a really good pulse on that. I think direct communication with you just kind
Right.
of, again, goes back to knowing what God's speaking to us during a certain season. So that's from a spiritual standpoint. Being current on songs that, honestly, there's songs that we'll do that are played on the radio a lot. And I mentioned this again last month. It may not be my personal favorite song, but I know it makes my job easier when they come in knowing the song already.
Sure.
And so I'll pick songs, as I'm listening to the radio that I'm like, man, this song's on the radio. It's really resonating with people. And probably those songs, I get more compliments or feedback on those songs than any other song.
Right.
Because people come in, they're familiar, they've heard it, they know it, and it's easier for them to engage. It's more familiar to
Yeah.
them. From a practical standpoint, I always take keys into consideration. The keys that a song is in. There are certain keys, and if you want more information, feel free to email me. There's obviously musical aspects to
Right.
it, but being aware of what keys you're going into and not just thinking all keys are created equal, because they're not.
Well, and I was in a service, another place, another world, and they did a song, and the songs did not line up in key, so they had to totally shut down,
Right.
have this weird, awkward pause, and then shift. You could hear the musicians all shift up to the next key,
Yeah.
and it created a stutter in the
for
flow.
sure. And a little trick, there's times if it's just hard for me to make, because we'll change the key of songs to make them flow better.
Okay.
But if I ever have a time where I feel really strongly about a song, but it's hard to make those keys work, a lot of times from a practical standpoint, if it's a song that has like a distinct ending, a lot of faster songs are
Right.
like that, you can get away with them not being
Okay.
as compatible because there's an actual end to the song
boom,
and a
and
start
then-
to the next one.
Good.
So that's a little trick.
Cool. Here's something I want to throw out is I've always said with Brad and my previous worship leaders, he and I have the greatest influence over the flow of a service. And I would say to pastors and worship leaders, and pastors, you're going to set the tone on this. I need to have connectivity and a friendship and a relationship. He needs to know my heart. We talked about that a couple months ago, leading with your heart. And but we have to have a connection, because as he said, if our hearts are connected and and we're both connecting to the Father, there are times where I didn't even know I added something in my notes after they were, quote, done. And man, the song just nailed a certain portion
Sure.
of the sermon. And so I just would encourage pastors that you need to connect with your worship pastor. Go to lunch periodically. Talk about the services. Be open, pastors, to talk about what you sense in a series, in a lesson that's coming up, because I want to equip him to succeed there as well. Okay. We can have a good service, a bad service. We talked a little bit about that last month. I would say the most influential piece are the rehearsals, and just walk through what we do, get practical, how long, when do we meet, what's your goal in that rehearsal,
Sure.
and how does all that come together?
Yeah, well, we have rehearsals every week. So we expect everyone that's scheduled to be there on rehearsal night. And if they can't, then we will find a replacement for them, or they can't play. Now, the only, just being honest, the only exception that I have found that I might be willing to make an exception for that is if the schedule is set and we practice every Thursday, and on like Wednesday or Thursday something comes up with work or a family thing. If they communicate that with me, I might be willing to let them play on Sunday.
Okay.
So we're not finding a last minute replacement.
Okay.
But again, there's an clear expectation that they come Sunday, dialed in, ready to go. They're not having to learn the song.
Right.
So that's how rehearsals are. We run rehearsal from about an hour and 15 to an hour and a half. Rarely ever will we go
Okay.
past an hour and a half.
Okay.
If we ever do, it's usually because something's not going right. We got to really work something out with a song. But for the most part,
And are you just going through the songs? How are you coaching them in that? How is that hour and 15 broken out?
yeah. So we total, I guess it's 2 hours, because we do a half an hour with just vocals.
Okay.
And then we all come together for about an hour and a half with the band. And what typically we'll do is we'll run through the songs, kind of a working through transitions, working out different parts of the song, working out anything we're struggling with. We'll do that one time through. Once we have everything dialed in, we'll run the top of the set start to finish and actually record it so that we can email it to everyone and they can have it with,
Wow.
kind of the feel between Thursday and Sunday. Also, another thing is picking sets in advance. Again, God doesn't have to wait till the last minute to
Sure.
speak to you. So we try to have a very good system to where they have plenty of time to have those songs. And we have an expectation that when the band shows up on Thursday, we're not coming to learn a song.
That's good.
We're coming to rehearse the song.
So how soon would you put out to, let's say it was this week, this Thursday, this team, when would they be getting the list and know that this is a new
So
song?
actually, our process is that by the 15th of each month, we have the songs in for the following month. So by the 15th of March,
Woo!
we'll have the songs in.
Did you hear that, worship leaders?
For April. Now, obviously, Pastor Dean has the trump card where he can call me on a
I'm like,
Wednesday.
I really want to do
Yeah.
this song.
That's only happened, I think, once in the last year. And even then, it was like, if you guys can, great. If not,
Right.
it's not a mandate. But yeah, just making sure that we come prepared. There are times when in those rehearsals, I may feel in my heart that we need to spend some time worshiping, but that is an exception.
Okay.
That is not a weekly occurrence.
Okay.
Another thing from a practical standpoint, I don't know how a lot of you churches are. All of our team pretty much are volunteers with families.
Well, you've just
and
hit.
full-time jobs. And so,
Well, there's a hot button.
yeah.
Paid or unpaid.
Yeah. And honestly, there's no right or wrong.
Okay.
And it depends on, your bench, who you've got in the church, what people's talents are. And then I would say this, though, if you're going to pay somebody, don't lower the standard on the God side, the spiritual side,
Sure.
just because someone is talented. I would make sure that there's clear expectations and non-negotiables as far as the character and moral code, that we have everybody sign.
Right.
No matter how good you are, and then we coach people to live to that. Not perfect, but
Right.
live to a standard. And so for us as volunteers, and so, I want to honor their time. And so I work really hard to be prepared when
Good.
we show up on Thursday. It's one thing for a rehearsal to go 2 hours because you're just having to work something out, and a rehearsal going 2 hours because the leader showed up
And wasn't-
not knowing what was going on. And so I found that if I show up prepared, and I'm honoring their time, we're getting out hour and a half, hour and 15. Then in those rare occasions where I have to ask them to stay for 2, or more than normal, they're willing to do that because they know that I.
And
it's
here's
not
what
because we're not
here's what we
prepared.
found is people want to be a part of a team of excellence, and the
Sure.
more excellent we play and we present, it will draw people of excellence.
Yep.
And if you're
Absolutely.
not performing at excellence, people are like, I don't want to be associated with that. All right, so we rehearse on Thursdays. Our first service starts at 8:30 on Sundays. What time are you guys showing up on Sunday morning?
We start sound check, meaning we're there ready to start at 7:15.
Okay.
Typically, that's just one run through, but it gives us a little bit of margin that if
Okay.
something derails or we miss a part, we can go back and run something again. But we've never
Good.
had a Sunday that I've been here that we've been sweating whether we're going to get done, and we usually
Yeah.
have time to have breakfast together. And
Yeah,
hang
they'll
out,
have a
so.
bite to eat, pray, get ready for the service. Now, something that we've done for years that I don't know that many churches would require, but obviously we need our sound person, sound engineer here. But we
Great point.
we require our media person who's going to be throwing the words up on the screens to be here and to know the flow that he's
Sure.
going to function
Yeah.
on. Or otherwise, you've all been there, and you're like, we're not even on there, and the guy in the back or gal is clueless.
Yeah, it's been awesome to have our pro presenter media person there, because sometimes we'll change up arrangements, so we
Yeah.
don't always do the same song the same way.
That's good.
So it might differ between times that we do it, and so it's good for them to be there on Thursday so they can get it set up and know kind of our plan, our roadmap for the
Okay.
song.
What are some of the challenges and frustrations that you face in leading a worship team, filling 2 campuses? I like to get real because what we experience, others do.
Yeah.
What's some of your frustrations and opportunities, I guess?
Yeah, so obviously, the most obvious one would be just making sure that both campuses have the resources that they need. By resources, I mainly mean people. Our South Campus worship leader, he's done a great job of recruiting some people within that congregation to join the team, and he's coaching them, bringing them up. But then also, I'd say we're still working to kind of bridge the gap so that everybody on the team, no matter what campus, sees us as one church with multiple locations. And so if I were to ask, so-and-so, hey, could you go down south and cover? We're working towards that. But I would say that's the biggest challenge, is getting the buy-in that, hey, we're one team going after the same thing.
What do you say to the worship leader or pastor that's out there that says, man, we would kill for a drummer, we're missing a keyboard player, we can't find a bass player? What would you say to that person on how to find them or get them?
Ask around, try to, through your relationships, people with other churches. A very practical thing is, which we talked about last month, multi-tracks.
Yeah.
As you're building those teams, developing, that's a great tool and resource to where you could have some of those instruments while you're working to build up that team. But I would say mostly relationships, leverage those relationships, build relationships with other worship leaders within the community, and then ask around in the church. You'd be surprised how many people in the church used to play drums, are used to do this, and they maybe don't feel like they could do it. They think they don't know what's required, what the commitment would be. And so just being open and honest about the need and what the expectations are sometimes can lower
Well,
those,
I think look at your youth group as well. I love it. Throughout the history of the church, we've had teenagers, young teenagers, playing key roles in our worship team. I've had pastor friends that are planting churches, and they're trying to build a team. They have posted on Craigslist looking for a drummer. And now maybe they weren't the total package of everything they wanted in a drummer, but it was a place to start, and just getting that word out there. Any other thoughts on that whole paid and unpaid? What have you seen in your worship connections? When do you see a church goes to an all paid? I mean, we would assume it would be the larger.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with budget and resources. But one way that I've seen it done, which I think is very healthy, is there's one church in particular that's very big, and they don't have a lack of resources, but they start everybody out as volunteer. But then they have a certain point after a certain time of commitment, faithfulness, proving themselves, where it's not paid, but there is some kind of stipend and, a blessing, so to speak. But it's not, you don't go in with that as an expectation. It's something you work towards, and once proven, again, that church also probably has a lot of people, a big pool to pull from.
Bigger pond to fish in.
But yeah, that's a really healthy way. And there's even people, there's times when somebody will go above and beyond for a special event or something, and we'll look for ways to bless them.
Yeah. I have two questions. When do you let a person on the stage? How do you determine if they're good enough? I think everyone, even back to my youth ministry days, had people on the stage that their microphone was only in the monitors and they weren't in the house.
Or not even that. Not even on there.
But and then how do you turn people down, that you say to that vocalist, hey, you're just not there yet? Talk through that awkwardness of, do you put them on the stage and do you tell them they're not good enough?
Give my secrets away. No, that's a great question. So every worship leader, you guys have had the people come in, they're super passionate and they really feel called to this, but maybe their gift set's just not there. What I've found is that being direct and being honest is definitely the best approach. And what I mean by that is when someone comes in and they audition and they're not there, there's really two categories. It's somebody that just, you're not going to be able to get them there, or they're not there but could be.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's just not there, I will explain that to them, but tell them why.
Okay.
And for instance, if I'm hitting a D and someone's singing a G thinking it's a D, I can't get them there, right? They're hearing, who knows what they're hearing. So I let them know, like, hey, you hear this? This is a D, and you're singing this. Do you hear the difference? And a lot of times they don't. And so I'll just let them know, hey, we're gonna need
We have
you
a tone issue.
We're gonna need you to know how to sing on this key. So practice this. If you feel like you get to where you can do it, let's talk again. Most of the time, they don't come back. But just being honest, like, hey, this is why. This is where you're at, and this is what we need, and this is why we're not on the same page.
Well, the principle we have around here is we constantly pray for winners to be added to our team. So we're praying in musicians and vocalists and leaders and so forth. So I think that's important.
And another thing, just real quick, is if somebody can't serve on that team, I try to be very intentional about inquiring, what are some other things you're passionate about? What are some other areas? So that if I'm saying no to this, I'm redirecting to youth or another area where they might be able to serve.
Okay. A hot button I think we've got time to touch on is the importance of the sound engineer, the mix. We actually have a bowl of earplugs that, and I want you to address where the whole DB thing and where we range. There's a lot of topics here, but here's what I would say. We can't please everyone. I would say we try and please the majority of the crowd. It's always going to be too loud for somebody, and it's always not going to be loud enough for somebody.
Sure.
So we're trying to hit the biggest gap. But talk through the sound engineer. We run off of volunteers, and we have multiple. It's not like we have one guy that's there every week. We have multiple guys shifting and between campuses, and a lot of moving parts. But give some insight on coaching people on the whole audio piece.
Yeah, so first of all, the reason that it's so important, that we're not just trying to nitpick or harp on something, but as a team, we've talked about engaging and projecting and reaching people. So there's nothing more frustrating than when you feel like you're giving it all you got and the energy of the song or the spirit of what you're trying to portray is being lost because
the audio is so soft. It's diving at the second row.
So that can be. Now, we can't be moved by that, but it definitely
affects the service.
So that's important. But also it's important to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Like if the church down the street runs 105, that may not work for you.
Right.
You have to mix to the room. You have to. For us, specifically, it varies between services. You know, one DB in second service that tends to be a little fuller for us is not going to play out the same way in first service and vice versa. So it's important that whoever's mixes live. They're mixing to the room. They're mixing to the group of people, like the number of people that are there, and the energy of the song. It's important that you don't just get everything set and then walk away. Like you got to be there engaged. Okay, this song's doing this. I need to mix live. I need to be ready to. This is a part of the song. I need to push this, or I need to pump this up. And so all those things, can seem minor, but they really can have a big effect.
And I think a key, if you're not worship leader, is you need to be in charge of the sound. You're responsible for that service and the results of that service. And if you've got, Old Faithful who thinks he or she is in charge of the audio level, they really have got to come under submission to you and following your leadership because you're responsible for the big picture.
Yeah.
And that's not just everyone singing and playing, but having the levels at a level that...
Yeah, and it's important just to create a culture where people feel honored, they feel like they're valued, but it's honest. It's honest and honoring at the same time.
It's good.
And people don't take it personally.
So DB, what is the range we run?
So we run between 96 and 100, 102. And again, that depends on the service, who's there, which service it is, the number of people. It depends on the song too.
And I think a key on that, pastors, is we just about a year ago replaced our speakers. And we could have never, with our previous system, ran to those levels because we didn't have even distribution. So if we were measuring and it was running 95 somewhere, it meant it was running 115 in a hot spot.
Yeah.
But we got new speakers, and you can ask Brad about that, but we literally have 360 of the auditorium. We are within a few dB levels of each other.
Close.
So there's not the hot spots.
Right.
And we've actually, here's what we found. We're running hotter with the new speakers, and everyone, we're getting fewer complaints.
Yep.
So that's a hot one. What do you do with the infamous person who comes to the booth? What do you tell the guy that says, when grandma comes and says, this is too loud, I'm leaving this church if you don't turn it down? that's the complaints. How do you handle
Man,
that?
We love you, and we pray you find a great church. I'm just kidding. No, usually if that happens, I'm not the one in the booth, so they'll, hey, we'll let Pastor Brad know, and then if it ever gets to me, we just lovingly navigate that. It's really a case by case, but the biggest thing is we can't let anybody, good or bad, hijack the vision of
That's a
the
great
church.
point.
And we got to be. That's why it's good for you and I to communicate where we are as a church, where we're headed, so we're all speaking the same language.
Right.
Those
And we're
things
willing to take,
come up.
and I think this is important, we are willing to say that we are not going to adjust. This is the sound that we have hit the most. And if it does, if you have a hearing issue and it is more sensitive to you, we have a seat out in the lobby.
Yeah.
If you'd like to
We
sit
have
out there,
alternatives.
and we have alternatives that you can still see and participate with speakers, but it's not on the same level.
And I think it's important to not be afraid to explain why. This is who we are as a church. This is why we're doing this, and this is why we're not really gonna change from it in a loving way. So don't just be like, well, that's just okay, goodbye. Explain it. Don't be afraid of
All right, now we've talked about people on key, off key. We purchased a piece of equipment that everyone is raving about. Explain what we did, what this product is, how much it costs, and what it is doing for us.
Yeah, so there's a program called Waves. A lot of churches are using it now for their mix.
Like as in water waves,
As in water
W-A-V-E-S,
Yep, that's it.
waves.
And we use it for our mix. And with Waves, there's a number of plugins you can buy to create different sounds on different instruments with the drums. But one of the big ones is vocals.
And what does it do with the vocals?
It's a pitch corrector. But here's the thing that I want to emphasize. You shouldn't use this to make people good. Right?
Right.
You don't want this to be like somebody can't sing and we're trying to make them be able to.
Okay.
You use this to enhance it and make them better.
Okay.
It's not about making somebody good. It's about taking somebody that has some talent and just making it better. And it's just a tool that enhances. I still coach our vocals.
Right.
We still practice without it. I'm still calling people out if it's pitchy or we need to work on that. Because again, this is something that makes us better. We're not trying to get it to make us good.
Okay. All right. Last one. I want you to talk to pastors and talk to me. What can I do as a pastor to help my worship pastor or to help my worship team to raise the bar in the service from friends that are out there that are, have the good, the bad, the ugly? Give us some general big thoughts and ideas there.
I think communication is key.
Okay.
We hear that all the time, but it's very important that that the lead pastor is communicating with the worship pastor. You're letting us know, affirmation. I'm a words of affirmation guy, but not just that, but also letting me know when I could do things better. As a worship leader, as a creative person, we're feelers, and so I think oftentimes we can feel if there's a dissatisfaction, but a lot of times it's not communicated, and so that gives
Right.
way for bitterness, insecurity, all kinds of things. And so it's better just to have loving conversations. On the flip side of that, don't let the only time you're talking to your worship pastor be when you're correcting
great.
what they've done. So just have a good balance of that. I think it's great for the lead pastor to engage, be a worship leader, help lead the charge, and then just clearly communicate the vision of the house, and do it a partnership where you're working together on Sunday morning to make sure everything that's happening within that time frame, that opportunity we have is cohesive and we're going after the same thing.
Well, it's something I do, pastors. I don't do it every Sunday. He'll testify. But if I think of it, prompted to do it, I will send him a text, because in the transition, him coming off the stage getting set for the sermon and the set and all of that, and I'm greeting people, I might not have an opportunity to necessarily talk to him. So I'll do several things. I'll grab my phone, shoot him a text, and go, "This was crazy awesome. Let's do it again next service." I will intentionally hit the stage in the transition and say to the team, "Guys, you knocked it out of the park.
Yep.
That was awesome." Encouraging them, because let's face it, I've said this to my wife, the person on the back row, if they love it or hate it, that's a 2 on my scale of rating. The people who are closest to me, the people who are in leadership, I value their score the most. And so affirm your whole team. I'll tell people after a service, "Man, I really appreciate you playing today. You did a great job." Just most guys want words of affirmation.
Yeah. And then finally, I just want to say to the worship leaders, I would just encourage you to be honest with your pastor. Pastors create a culture where you can be honest and honoring, have different ideas that are ultimately going to help the church accomplish the goal. But just be submitted to your lead pastor. Trust that God's called you to serve the vision of that house, and don't think that you always know better. But work together to make it the best.
Humility.
Yeah.
The ideal team player. Hungry, humble, and people smart. Yeah. You're able to get along with people. Hey, this has been the Dean Hawk Leadership Podcast. Pass it on to somebody else. Share it on social media. We'd appreciate that. Rate it if you think it's good. Don't rate it if you don't like it. That I would appreciate that.
Keep it to yourself.
And be sure and check out deanhawk.com if you need some insights on some great sermon material, teaching outlines, sermon series, and all that great stuff. We love to just bless pastors and give that away. Once again, Brad at rockfamilychurch.com, Dean at rockfamilychurch.com if you have any questions for either of us. Otherwise, we will see you guys next month.
Thank you for joining us today. For a free sermon series and teaching outlines by Pastor Dean, visit us at deanhawk.com. Be sure and join us next month as we continue our growth on leadership.